The Higgs boson is not real. I'll accept a reference to the Higgs mechanism, and in this presentation you will possibly get the best representation of what quantum mechanics is trying to explain by inventing the Higgs boson and the Higgs field. It is said that classical physics cannot be used to describe the quantum world. What a crazy assertion. Classical physics intuitively should emerge from the interaction of a particle with our reality. Quantum field theory, said to be the most successful theory ever, cannot explain how relativistic effects and gravity emerge from the quantum world. Quantum field theory invents the Higgs field and the Higgs boson to explain what simple classical physics can explain if you describe a particle as what current measurements are telling us. Inertial mass can simply be attributed to the physical properties of particles. In this video, we will concentrate on the proton, but the same principles can be applied to all other particles. In this video, we will show how inertial mass emerges from the properties of a proton and time dilation as calculated by Lorentz factor. Quantum field theory uses smoke and mirrors to deceive us. Why do we imagine 17 fields when only one makes itself readily known to us? There are so many commonly held misconceptions that some of the smartest people in the world adhere to. Quarks are fragments of an oscillation, not particles, and the list goes on. There are physical properties that we absolutely know. Mass, shape, space, and time. Therefore, space and time is something. Why do we not ask, why does mass shape space and time? The answer is that matter utilizes space and time to maintain itself. Why do we imagine that there are 17 different fields when only one field makes itself readily known to us? That field is the electromagnetic field, and it permeates our very existence. Space and time is that field. In 1905, Albert Einstein made the energy-mass equivalence, E is equal to mc squared. In 1915, Max Planck made the energy-frequency equivalence, E is equal to h nu. So if energy is equivalent to mass, and energy is also equivalent to frequency, then maybe, just maybe, mass is equivalent to frequency. As it happens, mass is equivalent to frequency of oscillation. This is a postulated representation of a proton oscillation as compared to an oscillation or quanta of light. It evolved from testing other possible oscillations using the known RMS radius of a proton. The simple proposal that the circumference was two wavelengths accurately fits mathematical calculations of mass-energy equivalence. Logically, this makes sense, as an imbalance of mass would occur using a single wavelength. Why would the size of the vessel not indicate the resonant frequency of that vessel? The current accepted radius of a proton is 0.84075 femtometers, accepted by CODATA. Here, using nothing more than the known radius of a proton, we can calculate the frequency of oscillation of a proton. The frequency of oscillation calculated here is 1.13502 times 10 to the 23 Hertz. At this point, I'll explain again that this is a simplistic postulate for a proton. To explain my reasoning that the Higgs boson is not real, we only need to consider frequency of oscillation. Again, I point out that a proton is a horizontally polarized electromagnetic oscillation, which is a standing wave in space and time. Its E and H fields are 180 degrees out of phase. A neutron is a vertically polarized electromagnetic oscillation, which is a standing wave in space and time. Its E and H fields are in phase. Quarks are nothing more than fragments of oscillations of protons and neutrons, and actually support my postulate of an oscillation of two wavelengths. Chromodynamics is nothing more than a mathematical construct that attempts to explain the phase of the shear points when neutrons and protons are collided and caused to shear apart. This is basic proof of concept. If you want more proof, please refer to my other posts, including the proton radius riddle. Also note from this proof that the known mass of a proton is very accurately known. This opens up the possibility of calculating and accepting a more accurate proton radius, which I show in other posts. The frequency of a proton, as calculated using the accepted radius, is 1.13502 times 10 to the 23 Hertz. Speed of light, c, is equal to 2.99792,458 times 10 to the 8 meters per second, defined exact value. Planck's constant, 6.626075015 times 10 to the minus 34, defined exact value. Mass of a proton is 1.67262192,369 times 10 to the minus 27 kilograms. E is equal to mc squared. The energy in joules comes out to 0.150328 times 10 to the minus 9 joules. E is equal to 2h nu, where nu is the frequency of the proton. E is equal to 0.150412 times 10 to the minus 9 joules. I point out this is incredibly close, and it actually provides support for the accepted RMS proton radius. Where is the necessity of the Higgs boson and Higgs field? So-called relativistic effects are compelled to emerge from the motion of the particle when described as what current measurements tell us it is, and that is an oscillation. Timing is the most important aspect of physics. In this example, the frequency of the stationary proton was calculated using the known mass of the proton, which is assumed to be a more accurate calculation than calculating from the known radius. Time dilation causes time to slow for the proton. The oscillations of the moving proton increase, which explains the increase in mass with velocity. The wavelength of the moving proton decreases as frequency increases, which explains length contractions. So there are your mechanisms for increased mass and length contraction. As shown, E is equal to mc squared is equal to 2hf. Classical physics shows that there is a much more intuitive way to understand relativistic effects. No Higgs boson, just time dilation applied to an oscillation. The myth that is the Higgs boson. Kinetic energy can easily seen to emerge from the change in frequency due to the effects of time dilation on the particle, which is the oscillation. No Higgs field required, no Higgs boson required. It is clearly shown here that kinetic energy is nothing more than the well-accepted consequences of applying Lorentz factor, also known as gamma factor, to frequency of oscillation of a particle, in this case the proton. The energy released in collisions at the LHC is all recorded in the electromagnetic spectrum. Where are the other 16 different fields? The energy comes directly from the stored energy in the proton or neutron. This explains exactly how what is referred to as the Higgs mechanism works, but without any necessity for the Higgs boson or Higgs field. So for anyone who has had trouble understanding what the Higgs boson is all about, I'll explain the fictitious Higgs boson. It is supposedly the force-carrying particle that transfers the energy from the non-existent Higgs field to the particle. Even if you wish to stick to the notion that there are 17 different fields in quantum mechanics, and every particle is an oscillation of its perspective field, then anyone with half a brain should understand that at any level the known effects of the Lorentz factor automatically cause the oscillation of a particle to increase as its velocity increases. To put it bluntly, none of the so-called bosons are real, including the much-loved photon. I should not need to explain the myth that is the photon, but if you doubt me, please refer to Chris the Brain, who explains the photon is not real. The simple fact is mass is equivalent to energy. Energy is equivalent to frequency. Frequency is equivalent to mass. Therefore, purely due to increase in frequency due to the effects of Lorentz factor, frequency increases, stored energy increases, mass increases, wavelength decreases, and there are all your mechanisms for relativistic effects, including length contraction. In this slide, you can see the frequency of a stationary proton there, the mass of a stationary proton, Planck's constant, and the speed of light. Gamma factor calculated for different velocities. 1% the speed of light, gamma factor, the frequency of a moving proton, which is just gamma factor times the frequency of the stationary proton. Delta frequency, which is the frequency of the moving proton, subtracting the frequency of the stationary proton. Energy is equal to h nu, which is the total energy in the proton in the system. E is a gamma mc squared. The two equate. Here we have kinetic energy. E is equal to 2h delta F. So kinetic energy is just the change in frequency of the proton as it's accelerated, which is equivalent to the kinetic energy. And here we have the formula for relativistic speeds, which is gamma minus 1 times the mass of the proton times c squared. And you can see that kinetic energy equates to kinetic energy. Kinetic energy calculated using delta frequency equates to kinetic energy calculated using the mass of the proton, exposing the myth that is the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson is not real. The Higgs field is not real. The postulated model of the proton described debunks the Copenhagen interpretation that classical physics cannot explain the quantum world. The postulated model of the proton describes the emergence of classical physics, including relativistic effects from the effects of time dilation on a particle. The postulated model of the proton describes the mechanism for inertial mass, rest mass, and relativistic effects, which QFT cannot do. I also postulate that a proton is an oscillation with a horizontally polarized E field and is a standing wave in space and time. I also postulate that the E and H fields are 180 degrees out of phase. I also postulate that a neutron is an oscillation with a horizontally polarized H field and is a standing wave in space and time. I also postulate that the E and H fields are in phase. I postulate, as many other sensible people also postulate, quarks are nothing more than fragments. Up quarks are the magnetic components of oscillations and down quarks are the voltage components. The fragments, which are quarks, also support my postulated frequency of oscillation of 2 wavelengths circumference. What is chromodynamics? Chromodynamics is nothing more than a mathematical construct that attempts to apply color charge to the phase at the points where a neutron or protons cleave when they fragment in a collider. Thank you very much.